Gavin Newsom just called Donald Trump a convicted felon, a failed president, and a direct, unprecedented threat to absolutely everything this great country fundamentally stands for, delivering this highly rehearsed, meticulously focus-grouped condemnation on live national television, directly in front of an estimated 7 million eager viewers gathered to watch a high-stakes, deeply consequential political town hall broadcast from the heart of Bakersfield, California. Donald Trump, however, did not even remotely flinch, completely ignoring the aggressively thrown rhetorical punches. Instead, demonstrating the terrifying calm of a seasoned apex predator who has already thoroughly secured his prey, he simply reached his hand down into the remarkably thick, heavy leather folder resting securely on his lap, slowly pulled out a single, devastating sheet of official government paper, and held it up perfectly to the glaring broadcast cameras to declare with unshakable authority that this specific document was a verified Treasury Department audit, definitively showing that a staggering $20 billion had completely, inexplicably vanished into thin air from California's desperately overwhelmed unemployment system, entirely under the current governor's negligent watch. Staring down his visibly shifting opponent with a gaze that could melt steel, Trump forcefully suggested that if Newsom truly wanted to stand on a public stage and hypocritically discuss serious felonies, they should immediately pivot and start by deeply analyzing his own, aggressively signaling to the millions of shocked voters watching in their living rooms across the nation that they needed to smash that like button immediately because they were about to witness the 45th president of the United States methodically and systematically dismantle, humiliate, and utterly destroy the most overly polished, highly manufactured politician in modern America using absolutely nothing but hard, undeniable government documents, raw, unforgiving math, and the precise kind of ruthless, Queens-born street-fighting instinct that absolutely no amount of expensive hair gel, slick political consultants, and endless Getty oil money could ever possibly prepare a privileged person for. Going into this incredibly tense, highly anticipated Friday night, Gavin Newsom had confidently strutted into this massive agricultural expo center, armed with what he genuinely believed was a completely bulletproof, meticulously crafted strategy designed over months by elite coastal strategists. He was going to aggressively attack Trump's controversial record, viciously mock his unprecedented and escalating legal troubles, firmly brand himself as the undeniable, absolute future of the fractured Democratic Party, and triumphantly walk out of the venue with a pristine, triumphant 2028 presidential campaign launch reel ready for immediate syndication. He possessed the perfect, impeccably styled hair that never moved a millimeter out of place, the blindingly white, perfectly veneered teeth, and every single focus group talking point burned into his memory down to the very last dramatic comma and theatrical pause. But what he absolutely did not possess, and what he has fundamentally never possessed despite 2 full, incredibly privileged decades of continuously climbing the unforgiving, cutthroat ladder of California politics, heavily riding on the endlessly deep, unfathomable pockets of a legendary billionaire oil family, was a single, coherent, believable answer for exactly where $44 billion of hard-working taxpayer money had completely disappeared to. God help him. The Fox News special television event, fiercely and strategically billed as America's town hall. The debate California desperately needs was deliberately, provocatively held in a massive, converted agricultural expo center located in Bakersfield, Kern County, a region universally recognized by political insiders and terrified strategists alike as the absolute reddest, most fiercely conservative county trapped inside the borders of the bluest, most progressively liberal state in the entire union. This highly specific choice of venue was an incredibly strategic, deeply intentional maneuver by the network and the Trump campaign. Bakersfield fiercely represents the grit of massive oil fields and endless farming country, standing as the rugged, deeply hard-working, blue-collar half of California that Gavin Newsom's elite, hyper-wealthy San Francisco political machine had spent multiple decades actively pretending simply didn't exist in their utopian visions of the state. The massive, cavernous room crackled with a dangerously volatile, intensely opposing electrical energy, packed tightly with a highly divided crowd of 1,200 passionate people, strictly and evenly split between the 2 warring factions, with exactly 600 tickets distributed strategically through local Fox affiliates, and another exactly 600 distributed directly through official, highly coordinated California Democratic Party channels, meaning that exactly half the massive audience was furiously primed to cheer their progressive champion. The other half was aggressively ready to viciously boo him out of the building, and absolutely all of them were sitting on the very edge of their seats, ready to watch a brutal, unmediated, historic political bloodbath unfold in real time. Gavin Newsom arrived at the dusty venue first, stepping smoothly and confidently out of a massive, sleek, armored black SUV wearing an impeccably tailored, slim-cut navy suit entirely without a tie, deliberately leaving the top button undone to project that highly specific, meticulously engineered brand of California, casual that his incredibly expensive team of personal image consultants had spent literal years meticulously perfecting for maximum voter appeal. He warmly shook hands with the veteran debate moderator, Brett Baier, flashed a dazzling, practiced wave to his incredibly loyal, screaming progressive supporters packed into the designated sections of the crowd, and comfortably settled into his designated chair with the incredibly practiced, fluid ease of a wealthy man who had confidently completed 1,000 hostile television appearances and had never once in his entire charmed life been caught off guard or trapped without a slick, evasive answer to a difficult question. Donald Trump arrived exactly 12 minutes later, fashionably and deliberately late, as was his lifelong trademark, to assert maximum dominance over the room's energy, heavily carrying an imposing, overstuffed dark leather folder under his arm that looked significantly heavier than a family Bible, sporting his signature thick red Sharpie visibly clipped to his suit jacket's breast pocket like a loaded weapon. He offered a firm, acknowledging nod to the roaring, chaotic crowd, pointed directly and approvingly at an older gentleman seated in the crucial third row, proudly wearing a bright red MAGA hat while distinctly mouthing the words "beautiful hat," and abruptly, forcefully sat down at the debate table without even bothering to offer a traditional handshake or a single glance of basic acknowledgement to Newsom, leaving absolutely nothing between the two fierce political combatants but two plain water glasses, two heavily wired broadcast microphones, and the rapidly impending catastrophic wreckage of a presidential political career that hadn't even fully launched off the runway yet. When Brett Baier officially turned the heavily contested floor over for direct, unmediated exchanges between the two men, after surviving a highly tense, standard series of opening economic policy questions where Newsom smoothly cited job numbers and California's fifth-largest global economy status, while Trump punched back with brutal inflation and border statistics, Newsom eagerly, almost desperately, took the aggressive opening he had been heavily planning and practicing in private for weeks on end. He forcefully stated directly into the main broadcast camera to the American people that the controversial man sitting directly across the table from him was a legally convicted felon who actively tried to unconstitutionally overturn a free and fair election and maliciously incited a violent, deadly mob to directly attack the sacred United States Capitol building. Reminding the deeply divided audience of the numerous grand jury indictments and the unprecedented jury convictions that had dominated the news cycle, Newsom sneered with a palpable, dripping elitist contempt that Trump had absolutely zero moral authority to ever question anyone else's political record or governance, declaring him a failed president who left the country in crisis and a severe threat to democracy itself. Leaning back confidently into his chair, Newsom slowly, deliberately straightened his expensive French cuffs with the deeply satisfied, incredibly arrogant expression of a professional politician who genuinely believed he had just successfully delivered the ultimate, devastating knockout blow he had been obsessively rehearsing in his bathroom mirror for 3 straight weeks, entirely unaware of the absolute devastation that was about to be unleashed upon his meticulously crafted public persona. Donald Trump did not react to the vicious personal insult. His face remained a completely unreadable, hardened mask of pure stone as he slowly, deliberately reached his right hand toward his plain water glass, took a highly calculated, painfully slow sip of water to let the tense silence completely swallow the room, carefully set the glass back down on the table, picked up his incredibly heavy leather folder, snapped it open, and looked directly at Gavin Newsom with the profoundly dismissive, utterly cold expression of a billionaire who builds towering, historic steel skyscrapers looking down at a pathetic local mayor who cannot even manage to keep a single public sidewalk clear of trash and human decay. After mockingly asking if the governor was finally done with his little rehearsed speech and brutally noting that Newsom talks significantly more than any human being he had ever met, while simultaneously managing to say absolutely nothing of substance, Trump loudly announced to the silent room that they were going to entirely stop the political theater and start talking about real, undeniable numbers, the specific, unforgiving kind of numbers with massive dollar signs firmly planted in front of them and an endless string of zeros trailing heavily behind them. Opening the massive folder to the very first meticulously labeled, color-coded tab, Trump sarcastically noted that he had personally overseen complex corporate bankruptcies in the cutthroat real estate world that were infinitely more organized, transparent, and legally sound than the current, disastrous financial state of California, demanding with booming authority that they start at the very beginning to uncover the absolute truth about who Gavin Newsom truly is beneath the heavy layers of political makeup. He pointed out with scathing precision that Newsom had spent his entire political career aggressively selling vulnerable, working-class voters a gritty, completely fabricated, self-made narrative of a tough kid who bravely delivered newspapers in the cold and bussed dirty tables to achieve the ultimate American dream. Peering sharply over a pristine legal document directly at Newsom, Trump brutally exposed the massive, foundational lie of the governor's entire public persona by revealing to the shocked millions watching that the governor's father, William Newsom III, was not just some small-town lawyer, but rather the highly paid, deeply connected personal family attorney for the billionaire Gordon Getty, representing a family that is historically recognized as one of the absolute richest, most powerful entities in the entire history of the modernized world due to their unfathomable oil wealth. As Newsom nervously shifted in his seat, his fingers furiously tapping a frantic, panicked rhythm against his thigh that the unforgiving high-definition cameras instantly broadcast to the nation, Trump held up a verified 2004 magazine interview where the oil billionaire Gordon Getty explicitly, openly stated that he fundamentally thought of young Gavin Newsom exactly as a son. Trump detailed with sickening wealth exactly how the billionaire took Newsom on luxurious, private, all-expenses-paid vacations to watch majestic whales in Canada and chartered private flights to Kenya to see wild elephants on luxury safaris when he was just a young kid, weaponizing the governor's extreme privilege against him in real time. Trump stared directly into the camera and reminded the governor that working-class kids growing up in the actual tough neighborhoods of Queens watched heavy traffic rotting on the Van Wyck Expressway and absolutely nobody was flying them on private jets to Africa, drawing a massive, roaring wave of genuine, booming laughter and enthusiastic applause from the conservative half of the crowd, while the liberal side shifted in suffocating, terrified discomfort. Digging the rhetorical knife significantly deeper into the governor's collapsing narrative, Trump immediately produced hard financial documents, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Newsom's very first supposed entrepreneurial venture, a boutique wine business named Plump Jack, was entirely and completely bankrolled from day one by the billionaire Getty family, utterly obliterating the carefully constructed myth of the self-made, bootstrapped businessman. When Newsom weakly, pathetically attempted to defend his shattered honor by claiming in a high, defensive pitch that his mother deeply struggled and that he only had access and privilege but absolutely not cold hard cash, Trump loudly, theatrically mocked the sheer, unbelievable absurdity of the statement, comparing the defense to a man brazenly claiming he didn't technically own a luxury car. He merely had a fully funded personal chauffeur on standby 24 hours a day, reminding the audience that true businessmen take honest loans and don't pretend they ate mac and cheese while flying on private jets. Trump dramatically uncapped his thick red Sharpie and aggressively wrote the words Getty Boy in massive, thick letters on a large white notepad facing the broadcast cameras. He permanently and indelibly branded Newsom not as a noble champion of the people, but as a completely manufactured, highly polished product entirely built by billionaires, completely packaged and sold to gullible, desperate voters who mistakenly thought they were getting a leader who actually understood the grueling daily struggles of the rapidly vanishing American working class, effectively stripping Newsom of his every political defense mechanism. Snapping the devastating Getty folder closed with a loud, echoing crack, Trump promised the audience that he was going to immediately dive into exactly what the governor did with the massive, beautiful state those powerful billionaires essentially handed to him on a silver platter. Pulling out a dangerously thin, highly specific second folder ominously labeled in thick black ink French laundry, he immediately, masterfully transported the silent, captivated room back to the dark, miserable days of November 2020, reminding absolutely everyone of the brutal, draconian COVID lockdowns when struggling family businesses were permanently shuttered, local schools were chained closed, and desperate, crying families couldn't even legally gather in their own private homes for Thanksgiving dinner under threat of state prosecution. Trump directly, flawlessly quoted Newsom's own completely absurd, authoritarian executive orders mandating that regular citizens wear face masks even between bites of food while eating, before dramatically holding up the now infamous, politically catastrophic, Fox 11 photograph showing the governor seated comfortably indoors at the ultra-exclusive French Laundry restaurant, packed tightly shoulder to shoulder with a dozen incredibly wealthy guests, entirely maskless, laughing uproariously, and completely ignoring every single rule he forced upon the peasants over a decadent $350 a plate dinner before the cost of wine was even factored in. Trump pointed out the ultimate, sickening hypocrisy of the entire scenario. Sitting directly next to Newsom at that lavish, expensive table was the sitting CEO of the California Medical Association, the very specific man actively writing the strict, life-destroying medical rules the governor was shamelessly breaking in secret. As Newsom's shaking hand nervously tugged at his tight collar, a profound gesture of deep psychological panic broadcast clearly to 7 million viewers simultaneously, Trump relentlessly exposed the governor's initial, blatant lie to the public that the dinner was held safely outdoors, citing undeniable witness testimony, confirming that the elite party was eating a mere 20 feet away from others indoors and was so incredibly loud and obnoxious they had to forcefully close the massive sliding glass doors, mocking the pathetic excuse as outdoors with extra steps. The former president then masterfully dropped his vocal register to a devastating low pitch, noting with profound disgust that while Newsom was comfortably eating ultra-expensive Wagyu beef with elite political lobbyists, his own privileged children were happily attending an elite private Sacramento Country Day school completely in person with real teachers, while 6 million poor and middle-class California children were miserably stuck at home staring blankly at glowing Zoom screens. He detailed the horrific collateral damage of these policies, struggling 5-year-olds trying to learn the alphabet through a laptop, exhausted parents losing their minds, skyrocketing rates of deep depression, severe anxiety, rising child obesity, and catastrophic, permanent academic loss that studies proved these children would never recover from. Trump aggressively accused the governor of looking directly into CNN's national cameras and shamelessly lying to the working class by falsely claiming he was a struggling Zoom parent, pointing out with lethal legal precision that a federal court later definitively ruled Newsom's authoritarian school closures fundamentally, illegally violated parents' sacred constitutional rights under the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. When Newsom meekly attempted to dismiss the horrific, career-defining scandal as merely a bad mistake, Trump thundered with the righteous fury of a man who builds real things that forgetting to pick up milk is a bad mistake, but intentionally breaking your very own laws to eat at a luxury restaurant while simultaneously destroying millions of innocent people's livelihoods isn't a simple mistake. It is absolute, unadulterated contempt from a deeply arrogant man who genuinely believes the rules are strictly enforced only for the little people. Adding the words French Laundry to his Sharpie notepad right beneath Getty Boy, Trump perfectly transitioned the relentless assault to the state's total, catastrophic financial ruin, establishing a crystal-clear pattern of billionaire elitism and blatant lawlessness before slamming the incredibly massive third folder onto the table with a heavy, ominous thud that echoed throughout the expo center like a judge's gavel. Pulling out undeniable official state auditor reports and Department of Labor documents that Newsom's own government had produced, Trump revealed to the horrified audience that during the absolute height of the pandemic crisis, Newsom's completely broken Employment Development Department paid out at least a staggering $20 billion, with some independent estimates reaching as high as $30 or even $55 billion in entirely fraudulent, illegal unemployment claims directly to criminals. Trump aggressively wrote $20 billion fraud on the pad with intense, heavy strokes, emphasizing the B for billion, noting for crucial context that this stolen amount was significantly more than the entire annual operating budget of the entire state of Mississippi. He exposed the horrific operational reality that Newsom's administration had exactly 2 single human beings assigned to manually check for massive fraud in a sprawling state of 40 million desperate people during the greatest unemployment crisis in human history. He detailed with terrifying accuracy how thousands of incarcerated, violent prisoners sitting comfortably behind bars in San Quentin and Folsom prisons, alongside highly organized, international Romanian crime rings operating smoothly through Facebook groups in Southern California parks, were easily, automatically cashing massive state checks simply because the state failed to cross-reference basic prison rolls. Trump stared directly at the panicked governor, explaining exactly why these fraudulent claims flew through. Newsom's hand-picked, disastrous labor secretary, Julie Su, the very woman who later bizarrely failed upward to become Joe Biden's labor secretary, deliberately and intentionally made the executive decision to turn off the standard, vital fraud safety filters to artificially speed up the payment processing metrics for political gain. Trump accused the administration of completely disabling the state's security vault and leaving the massive steel door wide open for international thieves, and completely blamed Newsom for actively allowing it to happen under his direct supervision. When Newsom desperately pitched his voice high to weakly argue that every single state in America dealt with terrible EDD fraud during the pandemic and attempted to frame it as a national crisis, Trump's booming, dominant voice completely shut him down in an instant, definitively stating that California lost significantly more money than the next 5 states completely combined. He fiercely told Newsom not to dare claim every state suffered the same fate, noting that conservative states like Texas and Florida handled the crisis efficiently, while California lost $20 billion, specifically because Newsom actively hired grossly incompetent people who purposefully disabled the fraud detection software, hammering home that it was not every state, but specifically Newsom's state, his people, and his disastrous decision. Without pausing for even a single second to allow the governor to breathe or formulate a coherent response, Trump aggressively pulled out the next devastating set of state documents. The California State Auditor's April 2024 comprehensive report focusing specifically on massive homelessness spending. He noted that the beautiful state tragically harbors an unbelievable 171,000 homeless people, representing 30% of the entire country's homeless population, all concentrated within Newsom's borders. Writing a massive $24 billion on his legal pad, Trump revealed that California blew exactly $24 billion of taxpayer money over 5 short years on the crisis. Yet homelessness, shockingly, inexplicably skyrocketed by an alarming 32% despite the monumental investment. He brutally pointed out to the business owners in the crowd that if he ran his private real estate businesses like that, achieving a negative 32% return on a $24 billion investment, he wouldn't just be fired, he would be heavily investigated by federal authorities, dragged immediately into federal court, and plastered on the front page of every major newspaper in America. The absolute, devastating kicker, Trump revealed with a quiet, conversational intensity that was somehow more terrifying than shouting, was that Newsom's very own personally appointed state auditor officially concluded that the state completely, utterly failed to collect sufficient data to track where the massive mountain of money actually went, entirely lacking the basic required receipts to determine if the staggering funds accomplished a single, solitary thing to help people on the streets. He then exposed the dark, corrupt timeline, noting that when Republican Congressman Kevin Kiley officially requested a thorough audit of the funds back in 2020, Newsom actively intervened and killed the inquiry entirely, desperately not wanting anyone looking closely at the massive piles of cash. Continuing the chronological destruction, Trump noted that when the delayed audit finally happened 4 years later in 2024 and horrifyingly found that the state couldn't account for the massive spending, the panicked state legislature frantically passed a rare, highly bipartisan bill legally requiring Newsom to explicitly track all future homelessness spending. Trump stared a hole right through Newsom and revealed exactly what the governor did next. He shockingly, inexplicably vetoed the transparency legislation entirely. Trump fiercely demanded to know who on earth vetoes basic financial transparency and basic accountability, answering his own question by stating it is exactly the kind of corrupt person who desperately, absolutely wants to hide where the massive amounts of money actually went. Adding the catastrophic numbers together with a heavy sigh of absolute disgust, Trump wrote a bold, underline heavy 44 billion gone on the notepad, that turning directly to the camera to aggressively warn the nation that this incredibly reckless, utterly incompetent man desperately wants to be president and do to all of America exactly what he so successfully did to completely ruin the once great state of California, loudly declaring that the American people literally, financially could not afford this man. As Newsom sat entirely paralyzed, staring blankly into the middle distance with the unfocused, terrified stare of a desperate man furiously, internally calculating the massive, irreversible, career-ending damage happening on live television and continuously coming up with catastrophic numbers he deeply didn't like, Trump ruthlessly opened the highly anticipated fourth folder, ominously marked in bright red ink with the single, highly dangerous word donors, openly, sarcastically praising Newsom's slick, highly produced, multi-million-dollar television commercials about heroically fighting for the working class and championing the $15 and $20 minimum wage. Trump pulled out a deep Bloomberg investigative report dated the 28th of February, 2024, regarding Assembly Bill 1228, the highly controversial, economy-wrecking fast food minimum wage law that forced a $20 an hour wage on struggling restaurants. He exposed a deeply corrupt, highly specific exemption buried deep in the fine print of the massive law that magically excluded restaurants that bake and sell their own bread as a standalone item, meaning they absolutely did not have to pay their workers the mandated $20 an hour. Looking at Newsom with highly exaggerated, mocking puzzlement, Trump rhetorically asked the crowd who they possibly knew that ran a massive restaurant chain that specifically bakes bread and magically sells it as a standalone item, a bizarre loophole explicitly, undeniably designed to directly benefit the billionaire Greg Flynn, who happens to own exactly 24 massive Panera Bread locations across the state of California. Trump laid out the undeniable, sickening quid pro quo for the entire country to see. Spreading damning campaign finance records across the debate table, Flynn was famously Newsom's old high school buddy from Redwood High School who had personally, heavily donated over $220,000 to his various political campaigns over the years. Citing the explosive Bloomberg reporting, Trump accused Newsom of personally intervening and aggressively pushing for this absurd bread exemption, meaning the governor deliberately, maliciously wrote a secret financial loophole to ensure his wealthy mega-donors' workers remained permanently stuck at $16 an hour, while everyone else's competing businesses were legally forced to pay $20, completely bankrupting small competitors simply because their boss didn't write the governor a massive campaign check. While Newsom desperately, anxiously turned his head for just a fleeting second toward the dark wings of the stage for his completely helpless, panicked communications director who could do nothing but stand in the shadows with her phone in hand, Trump reached significantly deeper into the dangerous folder to expose the exact terrifying type of absolute criminals currently running the governor's inner circle in Sacramento. He produced a devastating federal indictment, loudly announcing United States versus Dana Williamson, November 2025, revealing that Newsom's very own, highly trusted chief of staff, the person who essentially ran the entire state government operation from 2022 to 2024, was facing 23 federal counts of bank fraud, wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, tax fraud, and blatantly lying to the FBI. He exposed the lurid, disgusting details of her crimes, revealing she maliciously siphoned $225,000 from a dormant political campaign account and outrageously claimed $1.7 million in totally fake business expenses on her personal taxes, notoriously including a $15,000 luxury Chanel handbag, privately chartered jets, and an absurdly lavish $170,000 birthday trip to Mexico. Setting the heavy indictment down, Trump delivered the absolute kill shot just 2 short months ago. In May of that very year, Newsom's hand-picked chief of staff officially plead guilty to the massive federal fraud charges. Leaning aggressively forward with his elbows on his knees, completely invading Newsom's psychological space, Trump forced the terrified governor into an inescapable, brutal corner, loudly declaring that he had hired thousands of people in his life, and while one turning out to be a criminal is a problem, when the absolute most powerful person running your entire political operation is a convicted, confessed federal fraudster, it is not a mere staffing issue, but a profound judgment and character issue that tells the world exactly what kind of corrupt organization you run. When Newsom weakly attempted to defend himself by claiming Williamson's actions were her own, and he had no knowledge of them, his once rich broadcast baritone retreating to a defensive, nasal whine, Trump instantly interrupted the pathetic defense. He forcefully reminded the governor that this woman literally sat inside his office, made massive decisions directly in his name, and legally signed documents on his behalf for 2 full years, while stealing massive amounts of money the entire time, demanding Newsom pick one of 2 disastrous options. Either he explicitly knew about the fraud and happily let it happen, or he was so breathtakingly, historically incompetent he didn't even know his own chief of staff was robbing him blind. Adding the damning phrases Panera exemption and chief of staff guilty to the rapidly filling notepad, Trump perfectly summarized the horrific, undeniable pattern of billionaire favoritism and rampant, unchecked criminality, fiercely shaking his head and vowing to the roaring conservative crowd that this highly corrupt, broken political machine would never, ever reach the sacred halls of the White House on his watch. Suddenly shifting the electric energy in the massive room to something terrifyingly intimate and deeply uncomfortable, Trump completely bypassed standard policy arguments and launched a lethal, completely unexpected personal attack. Deliberately sitting back, crossing one leg over the other, and opening the 5th folder to directly, brutally address Gavin Newsom's fundamental moral character. He dragged the silent room entirely back to the dark 2007 scandal when Newsom was the young, rising star mayor of San Francisco and arrogantly engaged in a completely unethical, destructive affair with a woman named Ruby Rippey, who was tragically the wife of his absolute best friend and fiercely loyal campaign manager, Alex Tork. Emphasizing the disgusting, deeply problematic power imbalance of the situation, Trump noted with absolute disgust that Rippey was also simultaneously Newsom's direct paid subordinate working as his appointment secretary inside his own office, a catastrophic, unforgivable betrayal that completely destroyed a fiercely loyal man's marriage, his job, and his entire professional career in a single, devastating day, a horrific act for which Newsom cowardly offered a pathetic, completely inadequate 12-word public apology at a hasty press conference, stating only that everything they read was true and he was deeply sorry. Trump let the sheer inadequacy of those 12 words hang heavily in the air, a microscopic apology for completely destroying a loyal man's entire life, while Newsom sat utterly motionless, the anxious tapping on his leg completely stopped, sitting frozen like a man carved entirely from wax and completely forgotten near a hot window. Trump then produced a highly recent, incredibly damning Vanity Fair essay, written completely by Rippey herself just the previous month, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Newsom was still actively, shamelessly lying about the sordid affair 20 long years later in his newly published, highly sanitized memoir. Trump pointed out that in the book, Newsom attempted to downplay the betrayal by writing that it was merely the briefest of affairs and falsely claiming that he was the brave one who finally came clean to Tork, but Rippey explicitly stated she was the one who had to tearfully confess to her husband, aggressively emphasizing not you directly to Newsom. Trump brutally accused the governor of disgustingly taking false credit for the painful confession in his memoir 20 long years later, proving he was still actively rewriting his own dark history just to make himself look slightly better to voters, delivering a crushing, profoundly resonant moral lecture on live television, defining true, unshakable character strictly as what a person actually does in the dark shadows when absolutely nobody is watching them. Before Newsom could even process the moral destruction, Trump suddenly injected a ruthless, massive, tension-breaking personal joke about Newsom's high-profile ex-wife, Kimberly Guilfoyle, noting with a smug smirk that she is doing significantly much better now with his son Donald Trump Jr., assuring the governor that she is doing absolutely great and asking him to believe him. As massive, genuine laughter erupted throughout the arena, violently breaking the suffocating tension in the room. A stern man in the front row wearing a Veterans of Foreign Wars cap shook his head slowly, recognizing Newsom as the exact kind of untrustworthy man who smiles with impossibly perfect teeth while simultaneously reaching deep into your back pocket for your wallet. When Newsom weakly, pathetically opened his mouth to defend himself, rapidly closing it in defeat before desperately attempting to dismiss the scandal by claiming it happened 20 years ago and he had addressed it, Trump firmly, aggressively shut him down, powerfully stating that continuously, actively rewriting dark history in a book for money to hide profound moral rot entirely proves he hasn't addressed it, hasn't changed or grown as a human being at all, but simply learned how to hide his severe character flaws much better from the public. Moving with a grim, absolute finality to the sixth and most devastating folder, Trump revealed to the hushed crowd that he saved this one for last because it wasn't about missing taxpayer money, elite hypocrisy, or political corruption, but about innocent, tragically lost human lives. Slowly opening the file to pull out heartbreaking, terrifying photograph, devastating satellite images, news footage stills, and grim official fire department reports documenting the catastrophic January 2025 Los Angeles Palisades and Eaton wildfires. Trump painted a horrifying, apocalyptic picture of absolute destruction. 10,000 completely destroyed buildings, entire historic, beautiful neighborhoods totally wiped off the map, and countless families who had happily lived in their beloved homes for 30 to 40 years, suddenly left with absolutely everything they ever owned, turned to dust, describing lost family photographs of growing children, irreplaceable melted wedding rings, and precious heirloom dishes their grandmothers had proudly brought from the old country, all reduced to nothing but gray ash. Holding up a stark photograph of a severely burned neighborhood, showing the skeletal remains of houses stretching infinitely to the dark horizon, with lone brick chimneys standing silently in neat rows looking exactly like tragic graveyard headstones, Trump exposed the sickening, undeniable reality that just 6 short months before the massive infernos erupted, Governor Gavin Newsom had ruthlessly, inexplicably signed a state budget that slashed a staggering $11 million critical dollars directly from highly vital, life-saving wildfire prevention and forest resilience programs. Reading directly from a damning legislative analyst's office report, Trump listed the specific, deadly cuts. $5 million slashed from crucial fuel reduction teams, $28 million gutted from conservancies that actively manage dangerous wildfire risks, $12 million removed from a vital program designed specifically to protect vulnerable homes from encroaching fires, and $8 million stripped from critical environmental monitoring and research. Setting the grim report down, Trump picked up yet another shocking document, revealing that during the height of the inferno, the massive Santa Ynez Reservoir, heavily relied upon to hold 117 million gallons of life-saving firefighting water, was found to be completely empty and totally offline due to neglected maintenance that absolutely nobody had ever bothered to perform, leaving the desperate fire department completely unaware the water was even unavailable. Confronted with the massive loss of life and property directly tied to his negligence, Newsom's jaw was tightly locked in absolute panic, a distinct muscle in his cheek, visibly twitching rapidly. A pulse clear and visible even through the high-definition cameras, even under the blinding studio lighting, and even heavily plastered under his expensive television makeup. Trump fiercely demanded to know exactly what the governor was prioritizing spending the state's money on instead of basic public safety, pulling out absurd budget allocations to show the crowd that $14.7 billion was massively funneled into zero-emission vehicles, and $80 million was bizarrely dedicated to climate action through vague, nature-based solutions. Trump loudly mocked the sheer, unbelievable insanity of spending $80 million on something arrogantly called nature-based solutions, while actual nature was literally burning his entire state down to the ground strictly because his incompetent administration failed to clear the dead brush and fill the crucial water reservoirs. Turning back to the audience, the cameras caught a heartbroken woman sitting in the 7th row openly crying, not dramatic, camera-ready tears, but the quiet, steady, devastating leak of someone who had suffered profound personal loss and was now being forced to sit and watch the exact man entirely responsible attempt to explain that he had prioritized spending her tax money on elite electric cars instead of saving her neighborhood. Trump then asked the most damaging question of the entire night. Where exactly was the governor while the catastrophic fires were actively burning his state down, eagerly providing the disgusting answer himself by revealing that while California burned, Gavin Newsom was comfortably sitting in Davos, Switzerland, attending the ultra-elite World Economic Forum, giving pompous speeches about global climate change to wealthy European billionaires. Shaking his head in absolute disbelief at the staggering elite detachment, Trump noted that you literally could not make this terrible fiction up. The man's state is actively burning to the ground, and he is thousands of miles away in a luxury Swiss resort chatting about carbon emissions while sipping expensive champagne, leaving his people to burn while he partied with the global elite. Uncapping his famous red Sharpie one absolute final time, Trump dramatically drew a thick, heavy line completely under everything he had meticulously written on the massive notepad throughout the entire devastating night, and forcefully wrote two final, undeniable words at the very bottom: "People are leaving." Trump stared directly at the broken governor, declaring with total, absolute certainty that people are desperately fleeing his state in droves, pointing out that hardworking families are leaving, and massive, cornerstone, historic corporations like Oracle, Tesla, and Hewlett-Packard have all completely abandoned California, packing up and relocating to business-friendly conservative states like Texas, Florida, Tennessee, or frankly anywhere that simply isn't Newsom's disastrous, overtaxed, overregulated California. Trump bluntly told Newsom that this massive corporate and citizen exodus was his ultimate, undeniable failing report card, and he was definitively getting a massive, humiliating F from the American public. Turning back to the defeated politician, Trump systematically dismantled his favorite talking point, noting that while California currently boasted the fifth largest economy in the entire world, it used to proudly be the fourth before it humiliatingly dropped to fifth directly under Newsom's failed leadership, proving that even his highly rehearsed, focus-grouped bragging points were actively shrinking in real time. Desperate for any semblance of survival, Newsom predictably made one absolute final, pathetic attempt to save his rapidly dying career, leaning hard into the microphone and desperately reaching for his deep baritone, desperately reaching for his practiced political polish, and desperately reaching for the slick, untouchable version of himself that had successfully won so many past elections, charmed countless friendly journalists, and miraculously smiled through every single prior scandal. Newsom frantically recited his pre-planned script, weakly claiming that California has boldly led the nation in massive job creation, in unmatched technological innovation, and in aggressive global climate action, but Trump brutally countered the dying spin instantly, rapidly firing back with the speed and force of a bullet that California has only led the nation in exploding: rampant homelessness, in an entirely unbearable cost of living, in desperate people leaving, and in miraculously losing $44 billion of hard-earned taxpayer money directly into thin air. Trump delivered his absolute final verbal blow, telling the shattered governor that he was free to cherry-pick whatever skewed statistics he wanted. But the real people physically sitting in that very room and the millions of struggling Americans watching at home definitively do not live inside his fake, manufactured statistics. They are forced to live in his broken state, and they are actively, painfully suffering every single day because of his disastrous leadership. With a profound sense of finality, Trump slowly closed the sixth and final folder, methodically stacked all six devastating folders into one single, incredibly neat pile, and deliberately set them directly on the table right between the two men. Looking down at his utterly vanquished opponent, Trump acknowledged that Governor Newsom had come to the town hall tonight with the express purpose of viciously attacking him, admitting he fully understood that is simply what ambitious politicians do, but pointing out the governor's fatal, historic error. He had foolishly, arrogantly attacked a man who aggressively brought the hard, undeniable receipts to the table. Trump proudly declared that Newsom had picked a fight with a man who actually does his homework, a man who spends his entire life building tangible things like massive buildings, successful businesses, and real jobs, while harshly pointing out that the slick politician sitting across from him builds absolutely nothing of real value for the working class. Trump mocked Newsom's entirely artificial legacy, stating he only builds empty press conferences, hollow talking points, and a very nice head of perfect hair. But he definitively builds absolutely nothing that actually helps the struggling people of California. Standing up powerfully from his chair to signal the debate was completely, unequivocally over. Trump warned the entire nation that this highly corrupt man desperately wants to be president, praying God help us if that happens, because 40 million trapped Californians have tragically seen firsthand exactly what he recklessly does with unchecked executive power, and they are now desperately running for the nearest exits to save their families. Trump then turned his broad back on the governor entirely, addressing the massive, roaring audience directly to sincerely thank them for coming out and listening, telling the real California, the gritty California comprised of hard-working blue-collar families, dedicated farmers, struggling small business owners, and honest people who actually play by the rules that they severely deserve so much better than the corrupt leadership they currently suffer under. Gesturing dismissively back at Newsom without even bothering to look at him one last time, Trump repeated with deep, resonant conviction that they deserve so much better than this, confidently picking up his massive stack of heavy folders, casually tucking them securely under his arm, and decisively walking completely off the debate stage, leaving total, deafening silence in his wake. Behind him, Gavin Newsom was left sitting totally frozen in his chair, the unforgiving split screen still actively broadcasting his utterly defeated face to 7 million stunned viewers across the country. His trademark confident smile was completely gone, his slick political polish was totally gone, and while his expensive hair was miraculously still perfect because it was always perfect, absolutely everything rotting underneath it had been totally exposed, meticulously catalogued, and ruthlessly condemned on national television for all of history to see, ensuring that the presidential campaign he came to launch in Bakersfield was permanently dead on arrival, leaving the entire Democratic establishment in a state of absolute, paralyzing panic as they desperately searched for a way to survive the apocalyptic political fallout that was about to rain down upon Sacramento and permanently alter the trajectory of the 2028 election.